Oh yeah, here it's the little thing. I guess I'll just put this stuff in. Okay. I can't be mute because okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Michael. They say to turn off your video. Oh, here comes Tara.
Hello. I think we're live. Welcome to the garment industry call to action session this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Tara Rangarajan, and I represent the ILO, which is the neutral convener and host of the call to action. I pass it to my fellow panelists to also introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Christina Clausen from Industrial Global Union. I'm the director for the textile, garment, leather, and shoe sector, and we are an endorsee of the call to action.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Levine. I head sustainability at Under Armour Incorporated. We're headquartered in the United States, and we are from the brand stakeholder group of call to action endorsees.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today to discuss the global call to action. What I'm going to do is just start with a very brief overview of what the call to action is. And I don't need to spend a lot of time explaining the garment industry to you. You're all experts and you've been at this larger conference, but I did just want to highlight the importance of the garment industry to the economic and social livelihoods of more than 60 million workers worldwide who rely on the garment industry. The majority of them are women, and a large percentage also migrant workers. For many of these workers, this is their first time that they're coming into the formal sector, so really presents the first opportunity for them to earn a stable income for their families. And what we saw happen when COVID hit was widespread closures, layoffs, furloughs, failure to pay wages. It was really an unmitigated disaster. And this was compounded by the fact that many of the countries where garments are made have a very weak social protection system. So no social insurance, unemployment insurance, lack of medical benefits. So workers were falling through the cracks and really with no way to respond, with the very severe risk of of falling into extreme poverty and reversing so many of the gains that have been made. So in the latter part of March and April, the ILO, together with workers' organizations, employers' organizations, governments, manufacturers, all came together and said, we need a coordinated response. The only way to truly address this crisis is by coming together and seeing how do we protect workers, incomes, health, how do we ensure that factories can stay open, and how do we start to protect workers through looking at the social protection systems and the social safety nets that we need in their countries where they live. So at this point, we have about 125, 130 endorsees. The effort is overseen by the International Organization of Employers, the International Trade Union Federation, and Industrial, and again, under the coordination and neutral convening of the International Labor Organization. I'm not going to go through the details of the long and complicated text that was negotiated by all of these actors. You can imagine what went into deciding on each and every word. I'll let you go onto our website, on the ILO website, to find out more. But there was really 5 areas of commitments. One is about trying to harness financial resources to help address the immediate crisis. So international financial institutions, government donors, to say, how can we accelerate access to credit? How can we help with immediate income support, with low interest loans, and other types of support? So that's the first bucket of commitments. The second is about ensuring that those funds could be channeled to manufacturers and could be used for payment of wages, all the while respecting ILO core labor standards and ensuring health and safety were respected. As I mentioned before, highlighting the importance of building stronger social safety nets in the countries where garments are produced. And finally, brands committed to paying for all orders that were either finished or in production, to ensuring open lines of communications with their supplier partners, and when financial circumstances permit, to helping to support their factories where possible. And in order to turn this from a global set of commitments into real action on the ground, the effort selected 8 priority countries based on their dependence on the apparel industry, based on the liquidity needs of the business community, the risk of workers, and the relative strength of their social protection system. So you can see here the list of countries, and this is really where we've been focusing on our efforts in the past few months, is supporting national processes. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it to my fellow panelists, starting with Christina, to have a direct conversation with Michael about how we've moved this forward.
Thanks, Tara. And I think you gave a very detailed report on an overview of what the call to action is. So I guess for Michael, my question that I have for you as an endorsee, what made you endorse the call to action? Why was that important for your brand?
Thanks, Christina. So I think as we looked at the first quarter of 2020, brands saw and then felt the emergence, spread, and impacts of a devastating, fast-spreading global pandemic. As people became sick and fell victims to COVID-19, so too did the economies and business they powered and in which they worked. And as Tara has explained, the damage extended well beyond the formal sectors, such as garment and apparel and footwear, to informal sectors. The majority of people or workers at the center of this are women, also members of IPOC community. Businesses closed, demand for products dramatically fell or dropped off completely. Some brands, household names, are not here anymore. And for many brands that remain, they've lost many valued team members to the economic consequences. So in a crisis, there are different options for companies. You could turn inward and just focus on controlling damage, just look at individual survival. But I think the brands and the other call to action endorsees chose to step off the sidelines and act, recognizing that unprecedented times require unprecedented global partnerships. There was a need for tripartite expertise, deep knowledge and experience globally and locally in labor markets and economies. So we turned to the ILO. I want to start, and I'm sure I'll forget many, by thanking contributors and parts of the call to action. First, Guy Ryder, Dan Reese, Rupa Nair, and Utara, and the Social Protection Bureau of the ILO. Thanks as well to Sharon Burrows and Allison Tate of ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation. Thanks to you, Christina, and previously to Jenny Holcroft of Industrial. And last but no way least, to the IOE, International Organization of Employers, including Roberto Suarez Santos, and in particular to the hard work leadership of Matthias Torns and Matthias Espinosa. Turning back to the call to action, we are seeking to pull together rather than watch things fall apart. We're trying to rise rather than fall together, and to build back better and investing smarter by first acknowledging that without personal health, there can't be economic or business health. And then we're evaluating the needs of workers and businesses that employ and depend on them, to identify the roles of and needed actions from governments, IFIs and donors, businesses, trade unions, so that we can work together to strengthen social protection systems, and then in turn support sustainable and resilient value chains. We're working together just wrapping up.
Go ahead.
We're working together though to address major structural issues that existed before and were laid bare by the pandemic. And I think we know that structural and systemic change will take time. Just one last point. I think we recognize in the call to action that progress has been slower, maybe is occurring at different speeds, in phases, times, and perhaps in ways that are different from what we envisioned. And I'm not a quoter, but here I think of James Baldwin's call to action, which was that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed that's not faced. So in short, in the call to action, we're facing this, we're acting to be in service of the change that's needed. Sorry about the lengthy intro, Christina.
No. I just wanted to grab onto one point that you had made. So the idea about how to do this jointly together and to come under the auspices of the ILO. I think for labor, that was very key. When we saw the pandemic, these unprecedented impacts on the sector, and we really saw workers in the sector suffering and the need for income support. Specifically for us as trade unions, it was very important that we have a clear way to mitigate the impact together and move the industry forward. Because I think some points that you mentioned, especially about the fragility that we saw within the supply chain, is really true. It's still, we've seen that. We knew as trade unions that the supply chain was fragile. We didn't have mechanisms in place to deal with many of the impacts that we've just seen, right? So what Tara mentioned, that workers could very quickly slide into poverty, and we still have a big concern around that. But I do know that you've been heading, as part of the international working group, you've been point on collectively, but you specifically have been point on the financial institutions, how we've approached financial institutions. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of background on what we've been doing to secure funds and what still needs to be done.
Sure. Thank you, Christina. I was supposed to ask you the question, but you were so adroit that you just answered the question before I got to it. So thank you. So the two principal groups through which the call to actions work is through the working group, which you mentioned, but there's also what's called the IFI task force, which roughly has 5 team members. Again, it's the ILO, Alison Tate of ITIC, you now from Industrial, Matthias Norens of IOE, and I represent brands in this regard. What we've done is engage with international financial institutions and donors. First, we had to identify which ones to go to, and these included the IMF and World Bank, among others. Then we had to reach out, communicate with them, and set up meetings. And what we learned through these meetings, which were attended by very strong and deep representation from these organizations, is their expertise in addressing developmental economic challenges. We learned, for example, that they already had tools in place through which, in this crisis, they had lent on the order of billions, if not millions of dollars, which are sent to countries at the country level. And importantly, we learned that the funds go to countries, not to particular sectors. So the next step was to find some common ground, to identify some areas where we can partner with these institutions to work at the national level. And I think we're also looking at working with them as they extend future loans or continue to suspend debt service, at whether we can attach some conditions to support the strengthening of social protection system. So to clearly not only build back better, but to invest smarter. And I think that was a big learning, that we have to go to the national level. And I wanted to turn to you, Christina, to ask you if you could explain to our audience how the call to actions work has occurred at the national level, what the focus has been, what your experience has been.
Yeah, thanks. That the national level is really where this has to happen. I mean, we have these broad priorities and principles, but how do you then implement them? And that's really on a national level. So we've convened in different ways, right? Every country is different. The stakeholders there have different ways of interacting. So we've kind of used the ILO as the neutral convener in some cases, and in other cases, for example, in Pakistan and India, we did kind of bilateral prep meetings with the employers and the trade unions on the call to action, how we can set a task force team there. So there's still like a lot of work to be done on the country level, and we're still, and as you mentioned in the part about the funds, we're still looking for those funds. And I think what's been very important is the ILO has done a really good job in dedicating the information, like their technical assistance, to figure out how these funds have come into the country, where they are, what have they been dedicated for, and can some of them be repurposed for this sectoral approach? Because as you mentioned, it is not the donors organizations like the IFIs give to the country, they don't give to the sector. So I think what we're trying to do through the call to action is unique in that sense. But from a trade union perspective and from Industrial's perspective, what's been very key for us has been the sectoral approach, right? We need as trade unions to have a sectoral approach together with employers, our counterpart, the suppliers. And I think especially in the sector, there's a role for brands to play in this industrial relations, call it supply chain industrial relations. So I think that's the implementation that's happening. I agree with you. Could it be faster? Yes, because work, we've just had another shutdown in Myanmar, for example, right? The factories have closed, so we're not out of the pandemic, and we're still really struggling for that access to funds. But I would say what's important also to mention from trade unions is that we know that the need for social protection is there. That is a key for us, and I think it's very important that the brands and the endorsees of the call to action have identified that as a long-term goal for the industry, because without that, it's going to be very hard if we have other pandemics or other incidences that happen, right? So without that strong social protection floor, it'll be difficult for garment workers. So I think that us dedicating ourselves to do it is an important step forward.
Great. Well, maybe we should jump into some of the questions that we've got coming in. We have a lot of questions coming from participants who are listening in. I'm going to read one of them. There's a range of questions on a very similar topic. And that is for you to comment on call for brands to pay workers. Not only are the poverty wages garments earn not sustainable, but they're now owed billions in wages. Will brands be pushed to commit to wage assurance? There's, I'd say, a whole number of questions that have been asked about whether or not brands can commit to wage assurance. So I think those are over to you, Michael.
Yeah, I think the answer is that the call to action is pretty clear on this. What brands have committed to is to honor their commitments to pay for orders completed and in production. Brands have also been hit very dramatically by the economic impacts of the COVID-19 crisis. Demand fell off, orders were canceled to brands, and that in turn, the lack of demand is passed back through the value chain. Brands are laying off people, they're retrenching, they're furloughing people, brands have gone out of business. So in short, what brands are doing are trying to work through this mechanism, working to contact the IFIs and donors to identify whether there are additional funds. There may be some brands that have foundations or other capacities to take additional steps, but in general, brands are suffering from the economic crisis acutely, and they're not in a position to make additional contributions. They're simply, in many cases, fighting for survival and to get back to some sort of normalcy, fighting, as Christina pointed out, through some of the shutdowns that would then reemerge after businesses have reopened.
But Michael, I just want to add that I think there is some space open within the way the call to action discusses the financing, is that brands and retailers, as Tara mentioned in her overview, can commit to give direct support to factories. So that space is still open. It's, the more money we can get into the system, the better it's going to be for workers. So, I mean, coming from the trade union perspective, we hope that we are able to ensure that workers who were impacted by the shutdowns and, wage reductions and layoffs have a way to make it through the pandemic and come out. We as trade unions want the suppliers to survive, right? They're our direct employers. We need an active manufacturing industry to continue in the production countries. And for us as trade unions, that's really important that the funds are there.
Great. I'm going to move on to another question. Someone is asking if there's a plan to ensure that workers beyond the priority countries are covered, and what support to non-priority countries would look like. Do you want to start with that one, Christina?
Yeah, Tara, maybe you can help me out, because I think what we have decided within the international working group is that countries can come and ask to become part of the call to action. So if the tripartite business, trade unions, and employers want to come to the call to action and say, for example, in Sri Lanka, this is something we would like to be engage in as well. I think we have the structure and the capacity to do that.
Yeah, And I think, even if a country does not come in as a formal, initial country, the call to action can provide approach and tools and advice to help support the initiative in other countries. Let's see, a number of other questions are coming in. As a result of COVID, do you anticipate that manufacturing will shift away from countries such as Bangladesh and Cambodia, as fashion brands may want to work with suppliers closer to their markets? Why don't we start with you on that one, Michael?
I think that brands look at global value chains and they find value propositions in different countries. So I think the brands source from different countries, there's still a continued interest in supporting the businesses and suppliers in those countries by placing orders as the demand restores. So I think brands will look at the value proposition, the quality of the products, the pace at which they can be delivered, the capacity for innovation, among other factors in choosing who their suppliers are. And there are strategies which do look at producing products closer to the markets in which they're to be sold. That also serves some important sustainability concerns, like reducing environmental impact. But in general, I think brands are looking to help support a just and resilient value chain by participating in the call to action and to take these actions in support of business partners throughout that value chain.
Perfect. And thank you for that, Michael. And here's one for you, Christina. We're talking a lot about brands having to commit to paying living wages. How about garment manufacturers? Can we ask them to commit to pay living wages?
So that's a little bit outside of the call to action priorities, but I'll just let you know that from Industrial, our main focus is to institute sectoral bargaining, where that happens on an industry-wide level with the suppliers. So we need to have that. We see that the low wages is a systemic problem in the industry. And to do that, we need to have collective bargaining on a sectoral basis. Now, we have work that we're doing with some brands under action, collaboration, and transformation, and you can look at the website and you'll see how brands are pooling their leverage to make changes in their purchasing practices, but that is not part of the call to action. That's work that we're doing with brands who want to commit, sign an agreement with Industrial and its affiliates to work towards sectoral bargaining in production countries. And I would have to say, when I look at the world and where we are, countries that had that system in place, for example, South Africa, they were very quickly able to meet with their employer counterparts and set the framework to how COVID's going to impact how workers are going to be paid. When we see countries that don't have that, it's a pandemic, it's a tragedy, and it's the fragility of the supply chain.
Thank you so much, Christina. Really want to thank you for your participation and also yours, Michael. For any other information on the call to action, please go again to the ILO website and search Global Garment Industry Call to Action. You can find more information there and certainly contact information for any of us for more questions. So I appreciate all the questions from the participants. Again, to Christina and Michael, it's been a pleasure being here with you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Tara. Great to be here with you as well. And thanks for your partnership in this work.
Thanks for all the questions from the participants as well.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
I think we're good.
Good to go. Fantastic. My name is Christopher Rayburn. I'm the Global Creative Director for Timberland, and I'm so excited to be here today. We're really proud to be part of this, of course, amazing summit in Copenhagen. And above everything, we're so glad to be here to actually present our case study, really as to what Timberland's been doing within circularity and regeneration. We've been putting these topics really at the center of everything that we've been doing around our design and manufacturing approach. And we're really hoping that today is going to be all about inspiration, education for anyone looking to learn from the roadmap that we've been working towards. And yeah, it's all an exciting journey for us. So first of all, I just wanted to explain a little bit about how I came into Timberland and my inspiration personally. So I studied at the Royal College of Art all the way back in 2007. In fact, I graduated, and it was around the same time that Timberland released the first Earthkeeper boots. And I remember as a recent graduate at the time being absolutely sort of amazed and inspired that a brand on Timberland's level and on that scale would be thinking in such a responsible way. So the Earthkeeper boot at the time used an incredible amount of recycled materials. It used really responsibly sourced leather. So it's pretty unique. It was a real game changer. And as I say, that really inspired me at the time. And then when I go forward, scarily kind of 15 years to now be in the role that I'm in now, it's so inspiring to be back at a brand that really is now making a difference on a global scale. So the great news for Timberland is that actually sustainability's kind of been in our blood, I think, kind of green blood, if you will. Obviously, we have a tree as our logo. And yeah, for us, it's really something that we've had from the beginning within Timberland. And so we're so aware as a company that sustainability now isn't enough. You know, it's really aware and really apparent to all of us now that the world is in a pretty degraded state. So we know we want to work as a brand to actively restore nature and to do our best to actually be giving back, essentially. So it's this kind of insight and the reality of the world that we're living in that's really promoted our vision, essentially, as we look towards 2030. We've put out a bold goal and it's completely transparent. We want to be net positive and we actually want to give back more than we take. And today's all about that learning curve. And I'm really proud and really pleased. I'm going to have some fantastic guests along with me for the journey. And the first is Divya, who'll be speaking about how the journey started.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So great to work with you. So yeah, so my name is Divya Idu, Director of Global Consumer and Shopper Insights. And just to start, you know, so clearly from a scientific perspective, we see that companies and governments really need to take positive action when it comes to climate change and the environment. And as a brand, you know, Chris alluded to this, we bleed green blood. It's very much a part of our DNA, and it's been there from really the origins. The difference today is that we're clearly seeing this rise in conscious consumerism, where consumers are increasingly concerned about the environment and they're increasingly thinking about their personal consumption choices. So they're asking those tough questions and beginning to wonder, like, how is this product made? Where are the materials sourced? Who are the people behind the product? What's going to happen with this product when I'm done with it? And so we see this shift happening, you know, where people are more conscious. And there's lots of data and evidence to support this. So from an attitudinal perspective, we know consumers are saying that they want to start to buy more sustainably, that they're willing to pay more for eco-friendly offerings. In fact, there was a study that was done with Global Web Index, and it was done with about 170,000 users between the ages of 16 to 64. And people were asked, you know, would you be willing to pay more for an eco-friendly product or less for something that was less eco-friendly? And in that, about 50% to 2/3 of consumers there said they would overwhelmingly pay more for an eco-friendly product. So that mindset we see, and we certainly see it's more pronounced with Gen Z. Now, many will say, who's not going to say that they want to buy something more eco-conscious? So it's not just, we're not just seeing this from an attitudinal perspective, we're also seeing it in actual behavior. So List, I'm sure many people here are familiar with, but it's one of the largest global online fashion search platforms, and consumers can go on there and search through different fashion stores. And they recently published their 2020 Conscious Fashion Report. And in that, there was lots of data to suggest that people are actually adopting these behaviors that support the mindset. So one of the statistics that I like to mention is since 2019, we've seen a 37% increase in people searching for sustainability. So it's gone from 27,000 searches on sustainability a month in 2019 on average to about 32,000. So that's a pretty dramatic increase in a pretty high level of volume of search. We're seeing increases on searching for organic cotton, increases in searching for recycled plastic and eco t-shirts. So clearly, you know, we're seeing this shift happen. So it's good ultimately. So that's today. But as we look to the future, we embarked in this project called Front-End Innovation, and Chris is going to talk a little bit about that in more detail later. But what we learned from that is that today people are being conscious, but the expectations that we expect in the future are going to increase. As more and more brands start talking about sustainability and talking about what happens, consumers' expectations will also become more elevated. So in the future, what we see is that it won't be enough for brands to just do less harm. There's going to be an expectation that consumers are actually, or brands are actually doing more and making things better. And I think, you know, for us, this is what's really exciting about Timberland. I mean, it's really been a part of this brand's DNA. We've been guided by this higher purpose. We talk a lot about our purpose of making things better, doing better product, building stronger communities, building a greener future. And so, you know, we're really positioned for that future, and it's just really an exciting time to be on the brand. So I'll turn it back over to Chris, who's going to talk about our vision and how we see that coming to life.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Divya. So exactly as we heard, I'd really like now to talk a little bit more about the work that we're doing, really as we're looking to, let's say, shift Timberland into really being a brand of the future. We have a new creative vision, and it's really about the intersection of fashion and nature that really makes us completely unique. And we're really looking at that unique kind of sweet spot, if you will, and the passion that goes behind it, and really looking at a new definition really for fashion, where we really believe that there's an opportunity here to have a much more vibrant way of manufacturing, of designing, etc., really doing better through everything that we're working through with Timberland. So we really think we can push the boundaries for ourselves. And really importantly for us, Divya teed it up as well, that this is about working with our community. It's about working with our customers and really learning and evolving as we go through that process together. I think it's so important, the world that we live in today, that we approach things really in a much more collaborative way. So as I mentioned earlier, we have this new 2030 vision. We've set that bold goal around our products actually being net positive and actually giving back to nature by 2030. And you know, that's a really big challenge. Let's be really honest, and it's a really long-standing sort of commitment as we look towards 2030. But we know with the sort of history that we have within Timberland, that love of the outdoor, the heritage that we have, we know that this is so important. So this is all about driving, of course, innovation as we go towards that. But I just really want to explain how, really, because of course, hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, this is all about the case studies. So for us, we're really looking at that bold goal in terms of two routes. One, where the first thing is about really looking at our products being designed, of course, towards circularity. It's a big topic at the moment. It's, of course, something that we strongly believe in and we're working towards. And we essentially want to be moving towards our products being zero waste and moving towards zero impact, ready for 2030. But we know that's not enough. You know, that's what we're so aware of, you know, with everything that we're seeing, the work coming through from David Attenborough, the reality of everything that we're seeing within the media and the research that we're doing. So over and above that, we know that we want to start moving towards actually sourcing 100% of our virgin natural materials through regenerative practices. So actually sourcing those materials, and we use so many of them, and I'll come on to that later, sourcing in a regenerative way, we believe we can actually tip the scales past net zero to actually being net positive. So that's a really sort of exciting for us, exciting topic for us internally, and that's how we see that we can really kind of change the paradigm. And we also know that we can't do this overnight. You know, I mentioned earlier around Earthkeepers being such a inspiration for me as a recent graduate all the way back in 2007. We're now bringing it back. You know, it's one of the big things that I've been working on along with an amazingly talented team in the background. So as of Fall Winter 20, we'll then be bringing Earthkeepers actually back as a platform, really as our highest iteration of eco-innovation. And I'll actually be showing a few products later on. And we know that through the sort of the testing, if you will, and then scaling through Earthkeepers, we can start to challenge ourselves. So for example, already for Fall Winter 20, we'll be releasing our first completely regenerative leather boot. We'll also be releasing a fully recycled leather boot. So it's actually made using all of the scraps of leather, ground up, reground, then actually made into a product. And this is all about us testing, learning, and then scaling. So before I introduce a really very special guest and someone that we're now become very close to within Timberland, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the sort of innovation process and the research that happened behind the scenes, really, as we were looking towards that 2030 goal and how all of this came together. And I think the thing before I jump into this is just, I really want to emphasize how collaborative this has been. So of course, internally within Timberland, I mentioned earlier about the green blood. When I started back in 2018, we already had so many people that were passionate about sustainability. They wanted to do the right thing. They were really, really into anything around products, around the way that we were manufacturing. But we also knew that we wanted to bring in expertise from the outside world as well. So it's about, again, that collaborative process. So I've kind of broken things down just into 3 parts of how we went about this. And the first was, of course, we looked in depth at researching and sort of collecting as much data and really understanding which parts of our business had the most impact. And for us within Timberland, this won't come as a surprise, we use a lot of leather, we use a lot of cotton, and we use a lot of rubber. So really understanding those impacts was the first step. And then really just starting to think, as we then went into step 2, well, okay, if we've got the idea and we've got the data on what the biggest opportunity and the biggest sort of impacts are going to be, then it's about thinking, well, how can we rethink those impacts into being the most positive that they can be? And that led us on to the journey around, of course, regeneration and the fact that we could truly go from this degraded method that we work within currently in a lot of practices around the world to then truly moving to this much more positive way of manufacturing, of agriculture, particularly, of course, around the rubber, leather and cotton that I mentioned earlier. And then point 3 is all about identifying the right partners to work with. And this for us is something that we've been fostering, we've been growing anyway throughout Timberland. It's all, as I mentioned, about finding the right partners, collaborating, and ultimately learning as we go through that process. So it's always been something that we've been very proud of. We, in fact, co-founded, for example, the Leather Working Group. And we really see then that the next step on this would be around finding the right partnership within, of course, Regen. So that sort of step took us towards an amazing institute called the Savory Institute, and they're all about promoting and again measuring the benefits of regenerative agriculture. So really understanding actually how this is going to work, how it can scale in a positive way, looking at food and fashion and understanding all of that stuff that goes into stuff, and then how it can be done in a much more positive way. So I've spoken for quite a long time there, but hopefully it's really good information. Hopefully it was broken down into quite an easy way with the 1, 2, 3 as to how we've done this. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and I'm going to hand over to Jim from Other Half Processing. And we're going to then just understand a little bit more about the amazing work that you guys have been doing and a bit more about the partnership. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate being asked to be a part of this panel with you and Divya. As you said, I'm the founder and CEO of Other Half Processing. Honestly, being here at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit does feel a little bit full circle for me. The last Copenhagen Summit I was a part of was the UN Climate Summit in 2009. I was there with farmers from around the world to promote regenerative agriculture's inclusion in the global climate accords, although frankly, we didn't have a lot of success at that time. Well, I'm disappointed it's only virtual this time. I'm very excited to be back in town 11 years later discussing the same topic, which now is increasingly recognized as part of the climate solution. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how we got here. My siblings and I were raised on a family farm in the state of Nebraska in the center of the US by parents who were early regenerative agricultural leaders. What makes regenerative farming systems different is the prioritization of practices that improve and build soil. And that has a lot of positives, including better fertility, better water holding capacity, which helps in times of drought and heavy rains, better biodiversity and wildlife habitat, and the thing we're all really focusing on about this, which is so important, which is the ability to actually help reverse climate change. Now, there's a lot of practices that are regenerative in agriculture, but one of the most important has to do with grasslands and how cattle and other livestock are grazed. When that is done in a way that mimics nature, which means that the cattle's movement is managed so that they graze heavily in a spot for a period, and then that grass is allowed to rest afterwards, the plants are able to actually extract carbon from the atmosphere and draw it down into the soil, which helps those plants' own growth, but also results in all those great things I mentioned earlier, including countering climate change, literally. Now, my brother Mark and I founded OHP to support this kind of agriculture that we grew up with that's better for cows, people, and the planet. And the support is needed because while cattle raising can have these great outcomes, it's not common in the US or most of the world right now, and that's mostly due to economics. Our mission at OHP is to incentivize regenerative farming by helping get more profits back to the farmers, ranchers, and native communities that raise the livestock in these ways that are better for all of us. We do this by adding value to the other half of their livestock, the valuable parts that are left after meat processing. Of these byproducts, the hide for leather is usually the most valuable, but regenerative producers and the processors haven't been able to get paid much, if anything, for that hide or the other parts, which has really reduced overall farming profits for these folks. Now, and this is due to several things. I mean, the first is just that most regenerative processing is done in smaller and medium-sized facilities, and those size facilities are disadvantaged compared to the larger transnational meat companies and their massive plants that not only process meat, but the other things like hides inside. But making matters worse, right now, the global hide market is really still at historical lows, with the result that many, if not most, of the small processors in the US that work with regenerative farmers and ranchers have actually recently started to have to pay to dispose of hides, many of which are buried in landfills. With Timberland's leadership, OHP is flipping that dynamic to make regenerative hides actually worth more. And this was possible because of Timberland's commitment to sustainability and its willingness to reimagine their leather supply from the ground up. This support allowed OHP to create and grow a traceable hide sourcing program back to the farm that directly rewards regenerative farmers and ranchers. Here's how it works, basically. We work with those processors to purchase those hides that are verified from the cattle of our partner farmers and ranchers, which we then transport to a tannery within Timberland's supply chain. But in addition to buying the hide, we make a direct payment to the farmers and ranchers that helps us with farm traceability, but most importantly, ensures that those producers benefit directly from that sale. And this payment is a very clear signal for farmers and ranchers about the growing financial value of regenerative production in the market, as well as out in their pastures and fields. And our intent in it is to provide encouragement to those producers and to get more acres and more farmers, ranchers, and native communities transitioning to regenerative production. Finally, Timberland's introduction and commitment to a traceable regenerative leather supply sends an incredibly strong message to the rest of the industry and to consumers of what's actually possible today. We can support these kind of climate-friendly actions, not just with what we eat, but with our shoe, apparel, and other purchasing choices. And that's something the broader industry needs to embrace and something consumers need to demand from them. Thank you so much for your time. Back to you, Chris.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. More positive for cows, people, and the planet. Absolutely love it. You know, that's why we're so on board and so excited, obviously, to be working alongside with yourselves. So the thing with all of this, and the reason that we're so proud to be speaking today, is that we're, of course, very excited about the journey that we're taking. We're also very open to say that actually we need to be working with partners across the supply chain. We really hope to be inspiring other brands, designers, other parts of the industry, all the way through to make this positive change together. We know we can't do it alone. So that's what this is all about. Before going back to Divya, I'd also just like to say that, again, hopefully a big theme throughout all of this is about transparency, it's about communication, and it's about collaboration. So we're really going to be welcoming any questions very soon. So if anyone wants to get those in, please feel free. We're going to have 10 minutes or so at the end. And with that, Divya, I'll hand back to yourself.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully it's, you know, you're really hearing that this is much more than just one person, right? So one of the things I wanted to start off, or in my closing part here, is that, you know, when we think about consumers, we don't think of them as a singular person, right? It is about a community. We know one consumer can't make the change, one brand cannot make the change. It's really about working together. So for us, it's really about our consumers is our community. They're an extension of us. And that's the only way that we're really going to make change. So that's, you know, first and foremost, I really want to double click that particular point. You know, as we think about sustainability, it's a huge space. And I think we know very clearly that the understanding of the space is still pretty early when it comes to the communities that are out there, and that there's a lot of education that needs to happen still. So, you know, driving education is going to be key for us, you know, so really making sure that we're distilling concepts in a simple, clear way, engaging, and ultimately hopefully inspiring, where people want to join us in our journey. That's really going to be important. And so especially if we want to really achieve our vision and goals for being net positive. And so how we're going to do that is really, we're going to work with our community. I mean, as I talked about at the beginning, our purpose has been about working together. So we're going to work with the community. We're going to bring them in. We're going to pressure test our communication. We're going to see that it, you know, people understand. And ultimately, our hope is that by doing this and elevating awareness and getting more and more folks to understand what we're about and what our vision is, making sure they understand what regenerative is, circular and all, they will join us. And as they go and make those choices of product to buy, they'll be a lot more discerning. They're going to really pressure test, you know, the product, like how is it made? What is it actually doing for the environment? We believe that that's what's going to happen in working with us. So, you know, that's a win ultimately for not just our community, it's for us as part of that community, and ultimately it's a win for the environment. So we're really excited about the future and look forward to seeing how we achieve it. So I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Fantastic, Divya. And importantly, you mentioned products. This is one of our first completely regenerative leather boots. So we think it looks amazing. It will be coming out this fall. And again, it's a big step towards that much more positive future. So with that, I'd like to kind of wrap up before we do move on to any questions that might come through. Please do feel free to type away. I think you've got the keyboard on the right-hand side where you can ask any questions through. So hopefully today has been inspiring, it's been interesting. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think above everything, we've learned how important sort of within Timberland, both internally and externally, how important collaboration has been through all of this. We genuinely believe that we have this opportunity to change the paradigm. And we know that we need to kind of be bold and brave and to act importantly with our community to do that. And so hopefully, as I mentioned, this has been inspiring and we can all work together towards this much more positive future. So with that, I'll check if we do have any questions that have come through at all. All right. So I kind of had to play a compare here. So I'm going to ask a question to Jim, which is, we've got one through here. So how does the intake of carbon into the soil compared to the methane emissions from cattle ranching? That's a good one.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of discussion around that, and there's a lot of science starting to look at that. I think overall what we see is that, that you get a net positive as you're looking for. We've got a great ranch in Georgia, White Oak Pastures, that actually had a whole life cycle assessment done on their production. And it was found that actually, yes, that because of their cattle production system actually ended up sequestering more carbon overall, including any methane emissions that came out of the animals. Overall compared to, and more carbon went into the soil than the cows emitted. So it was a net positive, actually, if that makes sense.
It would be good, Jim, just for, obviously you're an expert in this field, but let's assume some people out there, maybe they haven't heard so much on regen. So I think it would almost be good just to go back to basics. Every day is a school day, so it'd be really good just to understand it in layman's terms. Yeah.
Completely, yeah. The question is really because when cows are out in the environment, I mean, what I was talking about is what happens with the grass and the soil, how we can get carbon down into the soil through photosynthesis and how the plants actually work, and making it as simply put as possible. But the other side is animals, like the rest of us, emit things. And what they were pointing out correctly is that a cow actually emits methane from how it digests food. That methane is one of the byproducts that comes out, kind of like with us, but a lot more because of how their stomachs work. And so the question was, does a cow who's out living on grass for a long time actually put more carbon in the soil through how they graze than how much they personally emit as an animal throughout their life? And I think that, there's still a lot of question fully, but these farms and more research is showing that actually it is a net positive if you do these regenerative grazing systems right. Is that better? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And for anyone wanting to do a little bit of homework, I think both Jim and I, and of course Divya as well, we really recommend, there's an amazing documentary that's just come out on Netflix called Kiss the Ground. And it's got Woody Harrelson, in fact, narrating it. And it's, again, a really accessible way to just understand the benefits of this subject. So I really would advise getting on and having a watch of that. So we've also had a couple more questions, and I'll kind of answer them straight away, which is one directed towards us. Within Timberland, are we considering exploring more plant-based leather alternatives, pineapple, mushroom, as sort of part of the potential solution to lower our environmental impact? And the simple answer is that within Timberland, we look at everything that we can possibly be doing to reduce our impact. And these innovations that are happening around plant-based, absolutely, we're looking at. We also pride ourselves on the quality and the longevity of Timberland products. And it's really important that we do the testing in particular to make sure a new product or new material coming onto the market, it's going to actually, really live up to the standards that we need within Timberland. So absolutely, for us, it's about finding the right balance. I would say of the innovation, then of course mixed with that quality that we need. And then there's one here, but I'm going to open it up to us all. So other than regenerative agriculture, what other net positive practices are we working on, or could businesses be working on, essentially to shift the whole business towards positive? So teeing things up from my side, I think one of the things that's often overlooked is even the power supplies, and looking upstream, from even thinking with office buildings, the design studio, all of those things, and making sure that's all being done in a responsible way. But it would be cool, Divya and of course, Jim, if you have any other thoughts that aren't just about the cows.
Go ahead, Divya.
I think in terms of other opportunities to build on that positive, I think there's a lot more to go here. I would say that I would leave this one to the experts, to be frank. This is not necessarily my wheelhouse, but I think circularity is certainly one place that we're looking at. There might be opportunities there to build net positivity. So I think there's a lot more to be discovered here and explored. So more to come there, really.
Absolutely. So really, of course, circularity that we've mentioned, the regen side, but of course a lot around not just recycled, but recyclable, and then take back schemes, all of those things, of course, that we're looking into. And to wrap things up at Timberland, we're so proud that one of our commitments has been to plant 50 million trees within actually the next 3 to 4 years, and we're well on track to do that. So of course, all of these things working together, we really hope we're going to work towards a much more positive future. So thank you so much for joining us. We really hope that this has been inspiring. And yeah, we hope that you'll come along on the journey. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.